It's been a long journey for lead developer Noah James Dickinson to bring Viscerafest to life. As an end credits blurb states, he began workshopping the game around when he was 12 years old, and it has taken him 13 years to bring it to version 1.0. My history with the game also feels like it has been long and protracted. I remember playing it and writing a preview 4 years ago when it was unleashed into Steam Early Access with the promise of a year turnaround. Game development is tough, and even with the most talented people in the world creating new worlds and adventures, things take a long time. I bring this up because I wanted to do something a little different with my review for Viscerafest, rather than state if it's quote-unquote good or bad. For the most part, I did not enjoy Viscerafest. I understand and appreciate what the design ethos was for the game, but I don't think it nails its core premise often enough to feel like a satisfying retro shooter. If anything, this is almost a stricter take on the Doom Eternal loop that requires you to play the game one specific way to succeed. I overcame its challenge, but I had to swallow my pride a few times and simply stop playing for short durations to make it through. For a good portion of Viscerafest's existence, it had been a meme to call it ultra difficult. In the early access version, it was honestly kind of bullshit. For this final version, things have been tweaked and changed dramatically, and the game is all the better for it, but I simply can't hide from what I truly feel. I was not a fan of things here, but I can understand the struggle that Dickinson went through. For that, I'm going to take a more personal look at Viscerafest's story, see how it can relate to my own life, and give some critiques along the way. I hope you enjoy this different take on a review, because while this game isn't my cup of tea, there's enough interesting and intentional game design here that I think is worth discussing beyond binary quantifiers of quality. The story for Viscerafest is relatively simple, but chock full of some good character development. Players assume the role of Carolyn, a 27-year-old woman who is a mercenary for hire and an advent gun enthusiast. Through some bizarre event, she has obtained eldritch powers that grant her super strength and an unquenchable thirst for flesh. She uses these powers in her work to save up money to give her cyclopean alien boyfriend, Athens Fetter, the wedding he deserves. Serendipitously, a warlock named Cromune has acquired a massive bounty on his head when the game begins, so Carolyn sets off to claim the cash and live happily ever after. While I would actually love to break down the plot in more detail, Viscerafest is still relatively new, and I don't want to spoil things for anyone. It's not like there are massive revelations or some genre-defining prose here, but there is a rather personal story of love and loss at the heart of things. Both Carolyn and Athens don't feel adequate enough for one another, and that drives most of their actions. I'm not quite sure if Carolyn underwent some bizarre ritual to gain her powers in an effort to feel stronger, but she puts herself in harm's way in order to demonstrate her capabilities to Athens. Athens, on the flip side, is a diminutive guy who wonders why someone as incredible as Caroline would ever like him. I can't help but think that these plot points might be a reflection of Dickinson's own self-image. Working on a project for over half of your entire life is a scary thing, especially when you have imbeciles like me creating videos saying, quote-unquote, this isn't good as a potential outcome. There's every chance that he didn't feel adequate enough to stand toe-to-toe with other indie greats such as Dusk, Ion Fury, or Ultrakill. I can relate as, even while I'm reciting these lines, I'm not sure if this video will do justice to how conflicted I am about Viscerafest. For those unaware of how the game plays, for the most part it unfolds like a retro boomer shooter. You have fast movement, an emphasis on bunny hopping, a wide variety of enemy units, and a solid arsenal that doesn't really have any redundant weapons. Caroline also has the ability to punch foes or charge up an uppercut that'll literally explode enemies on contact. In some ways, Viscerafest feels like Quake, and I could see some rather incredible deathmatch games being played if multiplayer were included. At the start, you get ushered through a tutorial that explains how the gameplay loop for Viscerafest will unfold. Your ammo limits are rather constrained, so players are told to integrate melee into their tactics as often as possible. Some enemies can be quickly dispatched with your starting pistol, which is practically a railgun with how damaging it could be, but others have shields that will deflect shots. For those, you'll need to utilize melee, but then some other enemies are colored a specific way to indicate that they resist melee attacks. Along with those stipulations, punching foes will see them drop armor bits, and jibbing them will drop hearts that will restore some of your health. All of that is fine on paper, and it's very clear the main inspiration was Doom Eternal. Where I think Viscerafest stumbles is that foes don't regularly drop ammo for Carolyn to stock up on. People might get upset that Doom Eternal has you constantly shuffling to chainsaw enemies in the middle of big fights, but utilizing that tactic gave the player a ton of ammo to continue shooting. In Viscerafest, Things are laid out like a more traditional arena shooter, and you have to collect ammo packs to restore your guns. It leads to situations where enemies will be far above you on ledges or flying through the air, and you'll have to frantically charge your punch and hope you connect while dodging incoming fire. It's frustrating. Now, I don't really have a problem with the game being difficult, as I'd rather designers stick to their guns than back down on design principles. Where I think things take a turn for the worst is that Viscerafest doesn't employ a checkpoint system. Having unlimited autosaves would frankly destroy any semblance of difficulty here, see last year's Wrath Aeon of Ruin for an example, but when you give the player an extremely limited number of save beacons to get them through white-knuckle brawls, it often drags the pacing to a crawl. What happens quite often in Viscerafest is that you'll overcome a rather tough battle and grab a save beacon only to not know what is coming around the next corner. You'll instinctively save, but then be met with a super tedious platforming or puzzle segment, which takes a couple of minutes and then immediately thrusts you into another tough battle. When you inevitably die, you'll need to repeat that frankly drab puzzle before you can even return to combat, and if you're really unlucky, you'll die again and repeat that puzzle a third time. I can understand wanting to break up the pacing of your game with something different from the expected shooter cycle, but even if there weren't mundane platforming or puzzles going on, expecting people to repeat big chunks of a level each time they die isn't the best outcome. It hurts even more on later levels when they become longer and longer. Viscerafest takes a page out of classic shooters by having players go through a single episode, here called Chapter, that contains 7 levels. The first few levels of an episode are rather short, and often feel really good to blast through. The high difficulty doesn't become too overbearing, because when you master a level, it only takes you about 3 minutes to get through it. It's after the first mid-boss that the level design just falls apart. I wouldn't expect the entirety of Viscerafest to be over in 3 hours, but when levels are taking me around 30 minutes to complete without the constant dying and retrying of puzzles and boss fights, it just becomes old. I also have to mention that I'm not a fan of the boss fights here, as they take a page out of Super Meat Boy's design, where they're simply really drawn out and require extreme precision. Strangely, the second and third episode final bosses are easier than the first, but that's honestly a blessing in disguise. Not everything is dour or a missed opportunity, however. The second episode is where Viscerafest truly shines. It has better theming, some incredible music, good pacing with its battles, and a great weapon in the form of the grenade launcher. This explosive cannon shoots out a burst of 3 grenades that, on contact, spreads out in a cross pattern to eviscerate foes. It functions pretty similarly to the firebomb from Rise of the Triad, and is immensely useful in packed shootouts. Episode 3, though, fumbles the ball and tries to go for something more cerebral. While I appreciate dedicating so much time to fleshing out the story, when every level is 20 plus minutes long with segments where Caroline does nothing but walk forward while a disembodied foe narrates, it gets really tiresome. It doesn't help that even when you're engaging in gameplay, the majority of this episode is focused on platforming rather than combat. It exacerbates the problem I mentioned above, with long segments where you'll have no idea where you should save, leading to you repeating big chunks of a level if you're unlucky. Interestingly enough, I do think Viscerafest becomes a lot better once you actually finish the game. There are a ton of cheats and modifiers you can unlock by collecting red skulls scattered throughout levels, and they range from God mode to Halo-style shield regeneration. When you pop on a few different modifiers, you can tweak how Viscerafest feels and make it function like a more traditional boomer shooter. Just look at that insta-kill. You can't alter level design, and there is no unlimited save option, but at least the experience is highly modifiable. I should also mention the accessibility features, which can give you extra save beacons or even introduce a damage buffer, but they aren't really as extensive as what you'd find in major AAA titles. They're also not exactly accessibility toggles, but more difficulty modifiers. Now, I understand this review isn't exactly positive, but I don't believe Viscerafest is a poorly designed game. There are elements which are in constant conflict with one another, but the fan base around the game clearly enjoys what the end result is. I will not throw up some generic, "it's not for me" explanation, as I do believe with some better balancing, I could actually come around to enjoying this game, and I could even see it as quote-unquote good. Even as I was playing the game for review, some patches were put out that nerfed the boss fights and tweaked damage output values to ensure the difficulty options were more distinct from one another. This is very much still a work in progress. At the end of the day, though, reviews aren't a perfect metric of what a game can be. They are a summary of one's experience through a particular piece of media in the state that was available to them. Based on the 1.0 version that I played, I could not recommend Viscerafest to most people. I didn't even enjoy it as a person that craves FPS titles. As I grow older and my parameters for what I enjoy change, maybe Viscerafest will get its hooks into me. For now, I'll simply call it a promising game that couldn't quite hit the mark. I wish I could be among its fans, but there's simply too much here that puts me off.